Hello, everyone. We are live here on the webinar platform and also on our YouTube channel. So for our viewers that are watching us right now on YouTube, if you would like to ask questions to our speaker, so please register to that webinar by the link that you see in the stream description. So today we will speak about frauds, how to detect and prevent the increasing number of fraud today, and make sure that your customers are happy with the measures that you are providing and that you are not jeopardizing customer experience. So welcome to the webinar. My name is Olena Gryniuk. I will be host today. And my guest is Kate Dunckley, Head of Solution Consulting at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Hello, Kate. Please, you can now turn on your microphone and camera and say hello to us. Yes.
Cool. Yes, we are here. Hi, everyone. Hi, Olena. Nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to have you today. Okay, so before we start and go to the topic, let me mention some organizational moments. So our webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes. We are recording this webinar, so right after we finish, you will receive the link to the video and presentation. And we start from the presentation. And after it, we will be ready to answer your questions. So please type your questions here into the chat, even during the presentation, so as soon as you have them. So let us go to the topic at once. As I mentioned, we speak about frauds and detection and prevention, different and increasing number of frauds today. And Kate, let's talk at once in detail about that. I'm passing over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Olena. Right, I'm going to be sharing my screen because it's easier for me as well to handle the conversation. I have a couple of slides to go through and I want to touch on a number of topics. So if something resonates with you all, please shout in the chat. Righty-ho. Here we are. Can you confirm that you can see my screen, please?
Yes, perfect.
Fabulous. Fantastic. Right. So before I go any further, I will touch on a couple of findings that we had seen in LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Many customers of ours are noticing the digital transformation actually increasing, and it is unlikely to slow down. It's growing in Asia as well as in Europe and US as well. We are also seeing the fact that the number of payment frauds especially is increasing across the globe. And interestingly, 70% of fraudulent transactions in the digital world in the banking space mainly actually originated in the mobile channel in second half of 2021. What comes with it is also the fact that we have seen a huge number of scams popping up in various regions, and we have seen them popping up in UK. This is one of the number one topics talked about in the banking space here. We're also seeing a number of scams coming up in Australia as well as US. So it looks like none of the economies out there are actually free from those particular attacks. Additionally, what is happening, we are seeing the ongoing challenge where we have to balance fraud and friction together. And that goes for everyone. It goes for banks, it goes for e-commerce platforms, it goes for streaming and gaming and gambling websites, it goes for everybody. So we are going to be talking today about banking space specifically, but it is important to mention that everybody is affected by this. An additional thing that comes with it is the fact that we need to start looking at layering fraud prevention in organizations. We are looking at layers within layers that I'm going to be talking about in a moment as well. And additionally, the need for real-time risk assessment is, I would say, even mandatory. We cannot look at fraud happening 5 minutes after the event has occurred. So we are looking at making smarter decisions in identity space, looking to minimize friction, actually proactively detecting risks and monitoring anomalies within organizations. There's a couple of the topics that I wanted to touch upon, and they will become more meaty as we go through the conversation and through the presentation. So as you can see here, we are going to be talking about a different range of fraud typologies, from account takeover through scams, through remote access tools. We are going to be talking about new account opening space, as well as card not present for example. And let's start with new account opening. So the way we see new account opening fraud being prevented is by, first and foremost, leveraging a global network. And what that means is we are providing a global data-driven approach to fighting application fraud. And I told you about layers. We are talking about layers within layers. So first layer that we'll focus on is your local data. And within your local data, you would want to look at things like capturing the data that is provided during the application. So you look at customer's name, customer's address, date of birth, all of the information that they usually provide. But also what you need to look at is extra data that is captured during that process. So for example, the device that is being used. Have you seen this device before in your organization? And has this device committed any fraud against you before? For example, data such as email addresses or telephone number, have they been attached to any applications before? These are standard practices that we are looking at, and I know more and more people are looking into the networking of those details. And I think it's important to highlight that not only that standard data, but also everything from a technological point of view, such as high-risk locations, for example, or application that is being made from a location that is close to the home address or the application address, is also important. Once you looked at that, you look at another layer. So you look at not only your local information, but also global data. So you want to understand whether each and every data point that you are seeing has done something else somewhere else in the network. And you want to know whether the device that you are looking at right now, this applicant's application, has committed fraud before and elsewhere. We want to look at things like the age of the email address. Maybe the user has made recent applications somewhere else. It could be that they are credit hungry, or it could be that somebody is testing their identity information. And what you need to do there, you need to realize what value that information brings to you. Because what you want to do is you want to onboard your good users without friction. Not only that, because of the way data is being captured in the application process, you want to combine the information from the local and global data to actually accurately identify synthetic identities. So looking at device information, email information, phone number information, is it all brand new? Have you seen any of those data points before? And we also look at something that is called a digital identity identifier. That is a unique algorithm that allows us to basically identify the person, the online citizen, if you wish, behind the device. And from there, we are able to extract potentially some of those fake identities, if you wish. And talking about the last layer, we are looking at behavioral biometrics. So how you type, how you swipe. When you have a regular user, they usually know their own data very well. So you know your date of birth by heart. A fraudster has to look it up. They will have it written down somewhere. So we are looking at the way somebody moves around the page. If you are a new user to the banking service, for example, you will have potentially a low page familiarity, which potentially suggests that you don't know what's going on and you are following the flow of the application page. A fraudster would have done this many, many times before. So they will know exactly where to go, what to put in there, and they will potentially use things like keyboard shortcuts, because what they will have is a bunch of data on the side that will be sitting somewhere in an Excel spreadsheet, for example, and they will be copying and pasting data into the form. So either test the identity or actually commit fraud and apply for an account with the bank. These are some of the layers that we are looking at. And we have seen them being actually quite robust when it comes to application fraud strategy. Another thing that we are looking at and want to address is account takeover. Account takeover is actually a chain of events, and you need to monitor closely every single element in the data chain to actually be able to extract from the context what is going on. And the user profile that suggests there are some potentially behavioral anomalies will allow you to detect and prevent fraud. So first and foremost, how it happens. So it always starts with the data compromise, right? We have data breaches, we have phishing, smishing, and so on and so on. We have phishing emails, we have members of staff leaking the data. This doesn't go away, and I don't think it ever will go away. So you need to be very, very aware of what your staff members are doing. But another thing that you also need to look at is how the data that is being used in the account opening space later down the line, how it's being utilized. So we know that many accounts use either standard credentials like emails or parts of emails. So in my case, it would be, let's say, Kate Dunckley, and it will be my login credential. Now, not always everything will be compromised, but partial information is good enough. And what fraudsters will do, they will keep on trying to complete additional steps that are required within the account login stage. They will perform password resets. And what you need to look at is whether the device actually has been seen before. Is it new for this particular user? Have you seen within your network? And remember, we were talking about the local network as well, whether you have seen that device previously and maybe had many resets before. You would look at information that surrounds your actual user, whether they had any successful logins. Again, looking at behavioral biometrics, whether they have copied and pasted something. Maybe there was previously confirmed fraud on the device that is not necessarily linked to your banking setup. It could be that the device has been committing fraud somewhere else in the wider internet space. This is an useful information to have when you are actually letting someone in through the door. What happens later is there is recon going on. So the fraudster actually would want to learn something about the victim. They'll go and check how much money they have and whether it's actually worth stealing the money straight away or maybe using the account for different purposes. So you would look at information such as new location data, whether the IP address that the device is connecting from is linked or is in the proximity to the home address where that user usually logs in. We will look at information such as proxies or VPN information, potentially looking at a wider range and comparing that device reputation against banking industry reputation as well. So many customers will have more than one bank account. Not necessarily bank account, they would have some other financial services accounts as well. You'll be able to compare that information against others to see if you can actually extract and extrapolate some of the information from the network. And also, we would want to know when your users actually log in. If you log in every day in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, when you are having your morning coffee, that's a standard habit. If somebody logs in the middle of the night or at unusual time for no reason at all, it is worth noting that this login might be a little bit off. So you would want to know a little bit more about that particular activity. And then later you would go into further step where once you are in as a fraudster, what you would want to do, you would want to change some of the details because you would want to have a full control of the account. So we would advise you to look at potentially enabling two-factor authentication later in the journey because your fraudsters, what they will do, they will actually try to successfully monetize within the actual account takeover process. So you would want to look at things like when was the last detail change? maybe telephone number that is being used to communicate with the customer when you are sending an SMS OTP, or an email address that you use for communication. You would want to know that particular context to be able to prevent something from happening. You would want to also know whether the same data, such as telephone number and email address, has been added to several accounts. So again, you would want to look at that information in a very specific layer within your own organization. And when you see your user logging in every day at 7 o'clock in the morning as they're having their morning coffee, do they use a mobile browser? Do they use a mobile app? Or do they use a web browser, for example? If somebody is going on the mobile app just to check what's going on, whether the money is still there, that's fine. All of a sudden, they switch to web. They go on a laptop and something starts happening that is slightly out of skew and out of order for them. It's also worth mentioning and putting that information into context into your actual fraud prevention strategy. And the next point is to understand that going in and having a look is one, trying to take over and having the control over the account is two, but the three is having having money and actually monetizing on the back of the break-in is something that fraudsters want to do. So you would want to look at creation of new beneficiaries and actual payments going out. You want to use the intelligence and context that is captured along all of those different data points that we were talking about, from also the payment data itself, to actually make the most efficient decision. So we'd want to look at the difference, time difference between the creation of the new beneficiary and the actual payment. Sometimes the shorter the sequence, the most likely it is that it is a fraudulent activity. You would also want to know where the money is going. So if you are familiar with scams or mules, this is where potentially money might be going, to a known mule beneficiary. You also would want to look at a global picture, and you would want to know who else has paid that beneficiary. Again, we are looking at extra layer of biometrics. You want to look at timings and gestures, whether there are any hesitancies within the payment flow and within the payment journey, to see if there is anything that potentially might skew that particular activity towards the higher risk and potentially a fraudulent outcome. These are the things that you would look at when you are looking at account takeover fraud. What you will also look at is, in the similar space, a mule account detection. And once you stop your mules, you kind of can stop your fraud, because you would want to use techniques that allow banks to actually penetrate and control mule networks. So we are looking at three things: link analysis, management of different lists, and we are looking at machine learning. And machine learning is a standard thing nowadays in many, many institutions. And we will talk about it in a second as well. Once again, I will say that it is all about layers. And layered approach to mule account detection starts with just a simple link analysis. You would have to take a confirmed mule account. You would need to identify the device it has used. And then you would need to identify other interactions by those devices. And then you would need to loop out until the actual criminal network will stop growing. You will start finding all of the nodes that are indicating that the money is being passed from left to right and so on. And until you are completely happy and the network has stopped, that's where you can start taking appropriate action and start closing the accounts down. It is important to mention that many of those activities within the mule space could potentially have been stopped upfront with new account opening prevention, and also within the login space, because obviously mule accounts are usually sold on to someone else to handle, or they are being used by the genuine customers of a bank. However, there are some elements within payments that are happening that maybe not necessarily match the customer's profile. You would need to actually build a repository of devices that are known to be associated with your mule network, and you would want to track their activity in pretty much near real time, you would want to write rules that are recognizing the activity from bad devices. This is where you would have your list management in place. You would want to look at potentially creating emails or some kind of alerts to see what is going on straight away in real time, where the money is going, and having your operational team very aware of what is happening within the actual money laundering network. And again, you would need to take appropriate action. And the last layer here is making sure that your machine learning models that are built for purpose. And actually, you should be able to profile your behavior of mules appropriately to uncover new, previously unknown networks. You can train the models based on your confirmed mule data, and you can set appropriate propensities, cutoffs to ensure that you are capturing exactly the right amount of people. If you want to, you can set them up even higher to detect pretty much all of the necessary entities. And what you also need to do, you have to continuously loop back with your previous found frauds, previously found mules, to keep the bad list with the right outputs. On the back of that, what you'll also see is a linked remote account takeover fraud. And this goes into the social engineering space that is very, very hot nowadays, because the days when hacking and cracking to bank accounts, yes, it happens, but actually we are able to detect that much easier than someone who is being socially engineered. What that means is the customer is being put under duress. They are doing stuff that is being told to them by a fraudster on the phone, for example, or they're being instructed to take a number of steps in order to basically siphon the money out of their own account. There are two things that you can do in remote account takeover attacks and how to detect them. First of all, how do we detect them, right? That's the question. So we are looking at the standard tech support scam. So where someone says, hello, I am from Microsoft, or I am from your bank, your money is at risk. Let me help you out to transfer money to your safe account. What the customer willingly will do then, they will download a specialist tool that they will install on their device, and fraudster would take over that particular device. So we would look at detection of that remote takeover by basically scanning everything that is happening on the device. We will look at the way behavioral biometrics is being sending us signals, whether the person that is doing something on the device is of good or bad intent. We are able to look at things like mouse movement, for example, that might suggest that the account that is being operated right now is not being operated by the righteous owner of the bank account. And looking at those two elements, you can actually start detecting the remote account takeovers elements within the fraud journey. And the second part that you would want to look at is actually analyzing the data. So you would need to understand why your user would want to use a remote access tool, because it can happen genuinely. You would have potentially certain exclusions, and you would need to understand the legitimate reasons for remote access usage. But then again, there are certain providers out there that will let you download stuff, and it's not a bad tool. I want to highlight that this is not a bad software that I'm talking about. It's not a malware software or anything like that. It's a genuinely used tool for standard usage to actually connect to another device. But what you will see is certain tools are more often abused than others, and partially because they are available publicly and they are available for free, fraudsters will use them. So we would want to understand, for example, whether your customer is using a remote access tool for the first time in a banking space, and if they are, you might want to start stepping in and seeing how you can have conversation, start investigating. Was this something that happened purposefully, or were they instructed by someone to actually install that kind of software. So then obviously later on it will be potentially abused and the money will be siphoned out. So that's number one from social engineering. Number two is scam. And scam is very, very complex itself in nature. You have many different kinds of scams. You have dating scams, you have crypto scams, you have taxman scams, you have hello grandma, I am lost, please send me some money scams. And many, many layers have to be analyzed to actually protect your customers properly. So you would look at things like payments. And within payment space, you would want to use a little bit of math, statistics, and a little bit more intelligent way of looking at numbers. You would want to look at averages for your standard users. You would want to look at velocities. You would want to know where the money is coming from and where the money is going to. And not only within your local network, but also global network. So it is very, very important for you to have an overview of the transfer of money within your organization. You look at percentages of, for example, an account balance that is being paid. Interesting thing that happens within the payment reference field. For example, many of the scammers will say, put in something like payment for boiler or payment for housework or something like that. So not to alert the bank that this is potentially a fraudulent activity going on that is being performed by, unfortunately, the user themselves. What you also see is another layer that you need to look at, and look at the digital interactions that are happening within the space. So, for example, the device that is being used. Is this device being used on a regular basis? Whether the user is logging in and paying at the same time or roughly at the same time, you would have users that are logging in once a month to pay their standard bills. They will pay their gas, electrics, water, and so on. They will have standard transfers set up, and that will be fine. Now, you would see that if somebody starts logging in more often at not usual times of month or day or week, you can start investigating those activities. And then again, looking at setups too. You look at frequencies and patterns to actually detect whether the logins that are happening are of good intent. And also another thing, looking at aggregator services, because you want to know whether your user is actually coming from the normal original place as they usually do. Another thing, who is your user? Who is your victim potentially in the scam scenario? Is it someone young? Is it someone who is potentially new to internet banking? Look at the device profile, look at their setup, look at potentially alphanumeric patterns in names or any other data points. Look at how many accounts they have and how much money they have. Are they a wealthy customer who are not necessarily a tech-savvy customer? Therefore, they might be easily duped and basically send all of their money away. Or is it someone new who is actually new to the online banking space, but is young yet naive? These are the things that you need to look at, as well as the combination of payments and digital methods. And as I told you before, biometrics. This is where we are looking at groundbreaking methods of actual detection within a scam space. So the way you move around the page, whether you know what you are doing, we can detect that from the mouse movement. We can detect that from key actions, the time you spend on page, whether you are potentially being told what to type, whether you are on the phone call right now as you are making a transaction. Information coming from the device is very, very powerful when it comes to assessment whether the transaction that is happening is truly a scam or potentially a genuine payment that you're making. And then lastly, but not least, education and awareness. You need to tell your customers, be aware, target them, tell them these are the things we are doing. Sometimes you need to force interaction. You need to create a pop-up that says, are you sure you want to do it? Use the data to allow you to actually formalize that message and find the best way to communicate with different age groups within your banking system. You need to be aware of what the older generation respond to versus the new to online banking generation, and have that feed through not only the online banking, but anywhere in the media. If you can be there, be the spokesperson for the people who actually bank with you. And the last thing that I'll talk about here is, we talked about online banking, but I'm also going to be talking about a card space. Because it's all well and good to be happening in the card space in kind of isolation from the online banking. So for example, you have a card fraud system that is able to detect some of the transactions on devices that are being used in a regular pattern. And here you have a scenario where we have a customer using a laptop, making a transaction with the standard card, then they are using a tablet, that potentially using another device, and going into a slightly different mode when they are making a transaction. Simultaneously, the same devices might be used for logins and for making payments, for example, on the internet. So you would see certain elements of transactional fraud from cards perspective, as well from online banking fraud perspective, that you can potentially invoke things like fraudulent activity or not. Now here you have a couple of different elements where the devices used in the journey from the 2nd of February to the 7th of February have been seen in a positive and trusted environment. The final transaction here is a new device coming in and performing password reset within the account. And we can see that there is a potentially a risky device coming in and logging into the online banking. Now, if you had a good system that allows you to see what's happening within the card space that is slightly detached from online banking and actually connected the dots, you would be able to see that if you had communication between the two, your card fraud system and on your banking fraud system, you'll be able to infer that the device that was making a transaction was logging in into the online banking fraud system was risky. Therefore, the subsequent transactions that was made and actually was successful turned out to be missed fraud. You could have prevented that very, very easily by merging the two together. And I think it is important to have one view that allows you to see everything and actually enhance your customer decisions, because you want to collectively monitor all of the transactions in one place. So what you will then have is you will have more fraud, but fewer challenges. You will have all of your customer data in one environment that will allow you then to basically have a cross-channel device and behavioral intelligence view. What you will be able to do then is combine all of the transactional pattern analysis, not only from cards, but also online banking space. And that is super, super powerful. And when you start looking at things like that, it is important to mention that you can start inferring things like trust, which is an element that we look at Lexis Network Risk Solutions primarily in combination with fraud. So every coin has two sides, right? Good and bad. And yes, it's easy to look at fraud, but also you can take the same data and spin it around and start looking at it from a positive perspective. So you need to start asking questions of the data. And we were looking at different elements in different layers, right? So we were looking at device, location, behavior analytics, and potential threats that are happening within that space. You would want to look at, right now, various information, whether the device is new to the customer, maybe the location is persistent for that user, the behavior suggests that it's a consistent behavioral pattern, and potentially there are no threats recognized in that particular event, whether it's a transaction, login, payment, and so on. You can start looking at that with a fraud lens. So yes, we have a new device for a customer and we can see that device was used globally at high velocity. You can also say that there was unusual large proximity for that particular user to a regular location. And you can see that there was a use of paste and abnormal keyboard shortcuts, for example, with addition to, let's say, that particular device being on a global block list, somewhere marked by another customer or another peer within your larger network, and vice versa. You would want to remove the false positives when you are looking at potentially a new device for customer. But that's not all, right? You would want to investigate further, and you would want to see potentially standard location for the user and the usual Wi-Fi name that is being used by that user. You would want to look at the consistency in the way somebody types, somebody swipes. And that will allow you to see that potentially there is no threat in that user logging in or making a transaction, making a payment, or changing their details, because you are extracting the positive information from all of the thousands and myriad of different device and behavioral and location analytics that will allow you then to hone in and say, yes, this is a good person. To summarize, we have a couple of things. First and foremost, you would want to use crowdsourced digital identity intelligence to actually increase your fraud detection. Secondly, you would reduce your false positives and unnecessary customer inconvenience when you start finding more fraud. That automatically goes hand in hand. Additionally, you would want to know why something happens. And it is very important to have that clear box rationale, to have the transparency when the data is coming through and it's actually coming through across all of the fraud decisions. And you can use, for example, tools like ours in the company here. We can use threat metrics, for example, as a standalone fraud solution, or you can integrate it with simply your current fraud defense systems. There are many, many layers here. So I would love to have any questions if there are any. And I really, really thank you for your attention. I know there was a lot to take in. It was a very quick whiz through our fraud landscape. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate, for such detailed presentation. We do have a question, but firstly we have comment from Gispan that best example for the remote account takeover is Microsoft scam that first targeting elderly people who are above 60 years old.
Yes, yes, that is correct. Yes, and we have seen many of those. And to be honest with you, it doesn't have to be a person above the age of 60. Like where I live right now, I am getting many phone calls from random people telling me that they are from a tax office. And yes, Microsoft is one, but the tax office, especially in the period around the end of the tax year, is not going to call you and tell you you have to pay money. There are various ways of communicating with the tax office, for example. So just having that awareness of how things happen and why things happen is crucial. But yes, to your point, somebody is 60 years old and you know that they are being attacked by someone and they are downloading a remote access tool. That is a great information. Carry on digging deeper and look what are the other data elements that you can utilize. See where the money is going. See what are the location information that you are discovering there. What is the type of device that is being used and things like that. So yes, element of a profile for the victim, but many, many other data layers there too.
Yes, we have a question from John. Thank you, John, for this. So, Kate, you talk about comparing data with retained previous information, interactions and contacts. Does this fit comfortably with GDPR requirements, and how much data can be legitimately retained with fraud detection as given reason?
Yes. So within LexisNexis Risk Solutions, for example, and within the realms of the solution that I have mentioned just a moment ago, GDPR is a number one thing that we look at. So there is a lot of information that can be retained for fraud purposes. It is important to know what kind of data is retained and how it's retained. So if there are any specific things that, for example, within your particular region are being challenged, I am more than happy to have an offline conversation with you and talk a little bit more, because I know that there are many customers who are worried about how much data can we retain to then improve the performance of our models or of our detection tools and systems. So I would love to have a further conversation with you, John, if that's okay.
Yeah. There is a question from my side to you, Kate. So actually what we see now, but also what you were mentioning and talking about, that, new frauds appears. So for example, some new fraud appears, then after some time we have respective anti-fraud solutions coming into force, and then after some time again we have these anti-fraud solutions defrauded again, and this is like becoming a never-ending story, increasing number of frauds and I think the budgets to fight them. How do you see the way out of the situation, and maybe does it really mean that banks and other financial organizations should increase their budget constantly?
Yes, this is a famous question of, is there a magic money tree that we can shake and the money will suddenly start falling off so we can collect it and buy all of the latest toys that we need? Yes and no. So it is important to have business cases when you are making decisions to implement a vendor to actually enhance your fraud decision making, right? I think you have to accept nowadays, in the current scenarios, the current world, you have to accept the fact that you can't do anything alone. Sometimes you will need to ask for help from somewhere else. So find a vendor that will offer you the best range of solutions for obviously the best price. And my favorite saying is, price is negotiable. So, use your best guys for that to close the deal. But also important to know how much money you are losing within your organization and who can be your advocate. So not only the head of fraud strategy, but also maybe a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. They might be looking for a tool that will supplement, I don't know, something to do with bot attacks, for example. There are tools out there within the fraud space that can combine some of those things for you. So do due diligence. Look at the tools that are out there and start digging a little bit deeper, because sometimes you can kind of get two in for the price of one. And if you want to see what your vendors are doing and how much money you can save, look at case studies, look at stories, ask around. You have peers in the industry, talk to each other, find out how much money somebody is saving by using tool X, Y, and Z. See if they are detecting frauds that you are not able to detect with the current provider. See who is out there that potentially can improve and become your partner on the journey and actually start shaping the journey and the tool with you. So there are many options that you can kind of start utilizing when you are thinking about implementing a new vendor or actually improving the vendors that you already have within your organization. Yeah.
And maybe my last question, because I see we don't have new questions from our attendees. Kate, how do you think, what is your opinion? Do the anti-fraud regulations are making banks invest more into the anti-fraud measures? Because normally, the standard solutions and actions we see is, first of all, the educational one, right? So we receive, all of us probably from our banks, that please do not open links from the SMS, etc., etc. So this is very important, of course, to understand how the things and processes are happening, but maybe not enough. No, so if I'm not mistaken, if I know it right, that not all the banks in Europe, or not all European countries oblige the banks that, for example, the money that were stolen from a banking account by fraudsters should be returned by the bank. So some countries it can be questioned, and the final responsibility could stay on customer. So do you agree that regulations help in this case, or this is another motivational factor that should work here?
This is a very good question, Olena. And it's a tough one, but ultimately, the question should be asked: if you, as a banking institution or financial services institution, if you had appropriate measures in place, comparable with your peers out there, would you be able to detect, for example, a fraudulent activity happening in your environment? The answer is 99.9% chance yes. So why shouldn't we look at the regulation that is out there, and it's actually there to protect consumers? And it is everybody's business to protect consumers, because we ourselves are consumers, right? And even people who work within the bank, they are consumers of the bank as well.
Sure.
So it is important to highlight the fact that yes, regulation is there to protect us, regulation is there to help us, and regulation is there to give you a guideline of how to behave in that space. And I think it's very hard to say regulation is there to haunt you, and the regulator says you have to buy this, you have to do this, and we have no money and there are other priorities in the business. Yes, but if you don't have it right now, then you will become the weakest link in the ecosystem, and you'll be attacked by the fraudsters first, because others will have already some appropriate measures in place, and your customers will automatically start going away from you, because you lose that trust as a consumer, that you, as a banking institution or financial services institution, you can protect my money. So I think it's important that you take notice of the regulation and you start acting sooner rather than later, and start preparing for that action, and make sure that your customers are happy.
Yeah. For me, actually, here the reputation is the most important thing, I guess, in all this situation. Okay, so thank you very much for this webinar, for this discussion. Thank you all the participants for your attendance and being with us till the very end. Yes, we will share the video, so you will find this either on our YouTube channel, because it stays here. Also, we will send you a link after we finish the webinar. So thank you for your comments, and stay with us. So we are continuing our webinars on different banking topics on our YouTube channel every week. So please subscribe our SME Banking Club channel and YouTube and LinkedIn to stay tuned. So thank you very much. Be safe and see you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.